Hello, everyone. So I'm live now, and now it is time for me to go to Twitter and find the tweet that I made earlier and quote tweet it to say, I'm live. Because this is a Patreon thing. And I've been doing more live streams to Twitch, but this is a Patreon only thing because I think the total number of people that I want to get feedback from on Genrenauts playtesting stuff I'm still trying to keep it focused, especially right now because I'm having done the private playtest with the Magpie Community Designer Spotlight thing. I got lots of feedback, and I'm trying to process how I feel about that feedback and talk it through and get a sense of where I want to go with the game. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on for this stream. Just have lots of things going on, things over here, checking the other things, many things, stuff going on. Okay. So yeah, the previous two Genrenauts design diaries, I think I just recorded and posted. But now I've done a lot more live streaming, and because I'm talking through stuff in the way that I'm doing, or because I'm talking things through the way that I'm hoping to, getting some feedback may be handy because otherwise I'm just going to be talking to myself about like, okay, here are some things that I have questions about, and maybe on my own I will be able to talk them through, but often that I have a better experience if I'm like chatting back and forth with somebody. Customization? No, okay. I have not done a whole lot of YouTube Live, and so I was like, so I use OBS for Twitch. Is there a thing where I can just like have a title card up when I do a YouTube stream to give a few minutes for people to be able to join up? Because when I stream on Twitch, there's usually about 5 minutes between when I press go live and when you can actually see me like doing stuff, because it's just my title card for a while. But different tools have different options. Like I would have to create a second private Twitch channel and not tell anybody about it. But then also, I don't know if there's other ways to like keep people who just randomly guess your Twitch name or who just are browsing whatever category you're streaming to. I don't know if you can keep them from doing that. So for a more like bounded streaming situation, YouTube Live is the thing that I know how to do. So that's why we're here. So the playtest that I did, I reused the mission that I had used for the longer running playtest group that I'm running, and for a one-off playtest that I did for the home game. That it's all online, but it's not being broadcast publicly. It's some friends from my SCA days and some of their friends, and it's a very fun group, and we have a very good time. And we, in fact, last night just completed a short campaign of Court of Blades that I was GMing that I talked about on Twitter. Let's see, I suppose I can link myself on Twitter here, right? If you are a patron, you will have already had the chance to see the kind of expanded and cleaned up version of this that's on Patreon as a text post. But here's another way of looking at that, if you're so inclined. And I think at some point I may make these videos public. The first one is several months old now, if not most of a year. And so patrons are getting a lot of stuff well in advance of everybody else. But I think there may be a point at which it'll be useful to have these be more visible. Because I'm going to get to the point where I'm confident enough in the design of the game that I'm going to want to make a lot of noise about it in terms of like talking about it on all of my socials and advertising it on my newsletter and in public Patreon posts and like running public playtests and things like that. I pitched Big Bad Con, which is returning to live this October in San Francisco. I pitched Genrenauts playtests to them as a thing that I would love to do for 2 sessions. I imagine that there's going to be a lot of people wanting to run stuff. They only have so much capacity, so I don't know whether they will say, hey, go ahead and run these. For that playtest, I pitched a different genre because I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ups and downs of using the adventure that I did use in the playtest this last weekend, which was the title that I have for it is Flight 1312. And it is effectively Die Hard, but the cops are on the criminal side, / Die Hard, but it was an inside job the whole time. So the setup is that there's a group of criminals who go into a bank and do a bank robbery. The cops show up. They go in to stop the bank robbery, except they were all already working together. And so then the cops and the criminals leave together to go to a small airport and hijack a smaller-ish plane, small enough that they don't need so much to operate it, but large enough to be all of them and to have the gas capacity to get from where they are to some country that doesn't have extradition to the U.S. So this is in the modern action region. It's very much in the vein of a Die Hard or like a different adventure in modern action might be more John Wick-ish or something like The Equalizer. Years ago, there was a TV adaptation of a comic series called Human Target, which is also, I think, a nice touchstone there because it was the type of action story that I think is more common in film than in TV, and was more common a while ago because science fiction stuff has kind of become more common. Something like Fast and the Furious would count. It's also kind of crime. And something with Genrenauts that's important to think about in general is that not a lot of stories are, or there are a lot of stories that are not just one genre. So a science fiction movie might be science fiction and action, or science fiction and thriller, or science fiction and romance. A romance story might be romance and historical. It might be romance and drama. It might be romance and comedy. The Genrenauts worlds are places where there is a pronounced and identifiable primary genre where other genre elements are secondary, and that the narrative dimensional physics of that space are clearly one thing over anything else. So I'm just gonna, what's that? That's pretty cool. That's a distraction. So I ran that twice, one for the one-shot group and one for the group that's ongoing. And I was really happy when I saw that the 2 groups approached the adventure very differently from one another. And that gave me some confidence that it was open enough that players could approach it in a bunch of different ways. But some of the feedback that I got from the Magpie playtest group was that while the genre conventions of action stories are very clear, they maybe are common enough in TTRPGs that that either the premise is not going to get as much of a chance to shine, or that because it's an action story, this mission is set up to privilege combat over everything else, and that an adventure in a different region might be a little bit more rounded in the types of approaches or plans that a group is maybe going to be able to do in addressing the breach and like solving the narrative problem. I should not have socials on, so I'm just going to wait. Actually, I can't close that because I have my playtest things, but I will close these other windows so that then I can focus. Except all this white over here is making me look like a zombie, so I'm going to turn this light on real quick. All right, that makes me look a little bit less like the undead being of the pale people. I mean, I get some sun walking with Oreo, but I also try to avoid going out in the summer when the UV rating is over like 3 or so, just because even with sunscreen, if I'm like accidentally out longer or if Oreo wants to walk longer, I would rather not burn, because I got a few different sunburns over the course of my time in the SCA and other things, and I would like to not stack more sunburns on top of that, but it means that I stay fairly luminescent when lit in such a fashion. So that's kind of how that goes. I'm going to go over here. Okay, great. So that's that. Talking a little bit more about the Magpie playtest. So this was a video off playtest. So I was not showing my camera, and nobody else was showing their camera. So it was just a voice chat. We had a text channel and we had a dice roller bot that people could use in that channel. Those people signed up about a week in advance, and they had the kind of blurb about like, here's a little bit about what Genrenauts is. Here's some comparisons. So I pitched it as leverage meets planetary, or think leverage meets planetary, and gave some basically content warnings. So police violence, combat, airports, airplanes, in terms of people pre-selecting in order to not kind of be dealing with content that they don't want to be dealing with. We also use lines and veils, and so some people added some lines and veils that were not very hard for me to avoid in terms of the material that I already had planned. And I made a sample character for each of the 7 playbooks that I have. So the playbooks, if I can name them off the top of my head, I will have to learn to be able to do this, and I don't expect to necessarily be changing the playbooks. So the playbooks are, I'm going to try to go in order, dramaturge, face, hitter, fixer. Fixer is before H. F is before H. Dramaturge, face, fixer, hitter, improviser, shadow, technician. Okay, that's 7, right? So some of these are more or less directly analogs of like other Blades in the Dark or Forge of the Dark type archetypes. The names are largely inspired by something like the leverage influence. So that's why you get hitter. Scum and Villainy already has the muscle, which I think is a good name that I may end up using if hitter is too obscure or not clear enough. There is a thing with playbooks in a number of these games where the designers seem to like having the playbook names feel evocative, but then there's a line, or there's like a range where you can be evocative, but it's not obscure or obtuse or opaque. And everybody's tolerance is a little bit different in terms of like how much of overlap there is between those different things, right? A little bit overlap, a lot of overlap. So we got that. I have dramaturge and improviser because to start making the playbooks, I just said, okay, there's a playbook for each of the main characters in Genrenauts. So Mallory is the face, Roman is the hitter, Sharon is the fixer, and then those are more aligned with other Blades classes. So the fixer is a little bit. So what I did is I kind of took the Spider playbook, which is the mastermind playbook in Blades, and I split it in 2. And some of that vibe went to fixer, and some of that vibe went to dramaturge. Angstrom King is the dramaturge, and dramaturge is very much like a team leader, big picture storytelling, some downtime and projects oriented abilities and things like that. And then improviser is, of course, Leah, who's the newbie. I'm also pondering a rookie playbook. There's a rookie playbook in Band of Blades that I think does some really cool things. When I was in the SCA, the kind of probationary member, or the new member of the fighting company I was in, was referred to as the probie. A probie for probationary member, taken from NCIS, which uses the terminology. My understanding is that probie is often used in firehouses among firefighters as well. But just putting probie on its own, like maybe that is a little obscure because I'm not sure how broadly that term is known, even with NCIS being a very popular show. And like the word probe is like, oh wait, probie, like what, aliens? No. So rookie is probably the better term there, even if in the series, the term that the group uses is probie. So then that's 5. Forge games often have 7 or more playbooks. And I did not have playbooks that were either the stealth-focused character, the shadow, or the using tech / the magic of the genre-oriented character. So in Blaze in the Dark, there's the Whisper, is like the magic class, more or less, though everybody can attune in that game. So I have Shadow and Technician as the 6th and 7th playbooks. Like I said, I might do a rookie playbook. There's also I have some question about whether it would make sense for Storyborn, so basically a Genrenaut whose origins are in a story world, not in what the Genrenauts call Earth Prime. I think I'm still leaning toward that being something that you would express in heritage or culture, kind of one of the biographical bits that you write for your character. So you'd write name, possibly an alias, pronouns, and then in Blades and a lot of other games, there's like heritage and background. I have culture and background, and the culture instead of heritage is because in Genrenauts, a person's cultural background really can inform their perspective on and relationship to various story genres. So if you have in the Genrenauts, so easiest example, let's not be complicated. Leah opens her first scene with talking about how her culture, her cultural identity, and her cultural background shapes the way that she sees stories, right? Talking about like kind of women being damsels in distress, and the limited roles for Asian women in something like Sword and Sorcery. Like that is expressing her culture in relationship to stories and storytelling. And as I wrote, I found that was something that felt like it would be very important. And I wanted to make room for players, especially players from a variety of backgrounds, to explore and or express that by playing characters who match those backgrounds if they would like, or as a place where people could explore some of that intersection of identity and engagement with storytelling. Because ultimately Genrenauts is a like adventure heist game, but also a game of thinking deeply about stories, why we tell stories the way we do, what role stories have in different parts of culture and life. So ignoring cultural background in something like this seemed like a bad idea, and expressing it as background could elide or override the part of background that I wanted to talk about, which is basically, what did you do before you were a Genrenaut? What was your deal? Were you a student? Were you, working in some field? Were you, so in various games we've had people like, okay, this character's background was they used to be a director. This person's background was they were a taxidermist. This person's background is that they used to be a stunt performer in film. This person's background was grad student, and so on like that. Because then a storyboard character could be culture, so like a storyboard character could be like middle-class Asian American, and then maybe you put 1 or 2 other details. And then background could be storyborn. If someone was like, if the thing that the player was most interested was expressing that storyborn thing, or you might go storyborn Asian American, and then in background you would say like secretary, or this is like so for a different character who is storyborn, someone who is storyborn from like science fiction, their background might be aristocratic Tellurian, like some alien species or whatever. Storyborn aristocratic Tellurian, and then background would be diplomat. Because culture and background are really about communicating who this person is to yourself as a player and to other players, and as something that you express in order to get XP. So basically role playing your character. I'm not super invested in mechanizing that as much beyond the way that it's already mechanized for experience. In Band of Blades, there are heritage traits. So your character's heritage, there's 5 or 6 heritages or something like that. And within each heritage, there are 4 traits. And when you make a character, you pick their heritage, and then you pick, I think, 2 traits that your character has. They're like, okay, you are like other Bartons in the way that you are, Bartons are known to be X and Bartons are known to be Y. And one of the rookie abilities that a character who is a rookie can have is every inch a blank. And if you take that ability, you have to take it as your very first thing. You get all 4 of the heritage traits of whatever your character's background heritage is, which is kind of cool. But that's your special ability. You get those 2 small bonuses on top of the 2 that every character gets. So that's certainly an option in terms of like giving more mechanical weight to background. I'm not super into that. I think if people want to do that, then that's fine. The other mechanical thing that some forged games do is they say one of the action dots you take should express your heritage and one should express your background. So it's like, oh, okay, I'm playing Severosi, and Severosi are a nomadic culture, and so I have a dot in survey because when you're traveling around, you need to be able to read the environment and sense and look for threats. Okay, cool, yeah. And then your background is like, oh, okay, well, I grew up in Severos and I was studying to be a healer or a religious leader or something. Okay, well then I'm going to take a point in attune. And so that's expressing your heritage in an action and then expressing your background. So something like that. There's so many things to talk about. I got derailed, but that's fine because this is all like just working through things and talking about stuff and seeing what I'm interested in. So yeah, I think the play itself went very smoothly. I credit that with having players who were they knew they were doing a playtest, so they were like, they met the challenge and were like, okay, we're mostly gonna, they played it kind of as I presented it. I didn't really feel like they were pushing against the premise or anything and being like, oh, well, we actually want to do something totally different. Like, here's your mission. They addressed the mission. And that was great. And we had a good time. They talked about having a good time, but for something like this, people are likely to say that they had a good time because they're being polite. They want to be nice. They want to be supportive. But I also got a lot of feedback, and not all of it like, here's all the ways that this game is perfect, because obviously the game isn't perfect. It's still on playtesting. And many published games, I would say, aren't perfect, even if I really love them, because even as like a toolbox, most games, even the really, really mechanized games, like high crunch, lots and lots of different rules for different situations, they're not going to be able to cover everything. So I was listening to a interview on, I'm going to get the name of this podcast right so that I can actually cite it correctly. Tabletop Talk Third Floor Wars podcast, in an interview with John Harper, who's the designer of Blades in the Dark, the game that created the Forged in the Dark style that Genrenauts is designed in. And in that interview, there was a thing. I was talking about players kind of making things their own. Yeah, so there's some story about players like making things their own, and you're never going to be able to design for everything, and that kind of collaborate there's a space that you kind of design and play into. So Harper was talking about game design is kind of like building an instrument, that you can put all the time and energy and love that you have as a instrument maker into the instrument, but ultimately you are making something for someone else to use, or you are making something for you to then use with a set of skills that is somewhat, if not entirely, distinct from the skills that you use to create it. And for a game designer, you're largely making something then for other people to use, if you are making a game to then distribute. If you're making a game just to run for your own home game, then that doesn't apply as much. So the players were nice, and they gave a lot of feedback. Let's see. I have 1, 2, 3. So I have almost 3 pages of like one line of text at a time, and then a carriage return of notes. And then I copied the chat, which had some other notes that I wanted to be able to hold on to. Did I copy the game chat? Is that in here somewhere? No, it's not. So this is basically my prep document, and then I added the comments into that. So people really liked the region-related special abilities. So in the action region, I have an ability that's called catchphrase, and that says twice per mission you can push for 1 stress instead of 2 stress. So normally it costs 2 of this resource stress to do a push where you'll give yourself an extra die, you get extra effect, extra result. You can spend only 1 stress if you kind of come up with a catchphrase or like a one-liner that's associated there, because in the action, kind of the action movie, action genre, that kind of quippiness is very common and seems to play an important role. And the quips tend to come with big moments. And so that kind of a thing. I have an ability called I'm Your Huckleberry, which is a line out of Tombstone. I believe it's Tombstone. It's not Tombstone. Unforgiven is the deconstruction. Tombstone is just the... It's been a long time since I've seen Tombstone, but that line was stuck in my head. So the Val Kilmer's Doc Holliday. One of the characters is coming to try to get, I think, Wyatt Earp, and then Doc Holliday intercepts him and says, I'm your Huckleberry. Like, you'll deal with me first. So I'm Your Huckleberry will let you single out a character, and you force them. It's basically a tank maneuver. You taunt them, or you force them to deal with you, where you create a fog, and that character cannot do anything except deal with you until that clock is filled. So if a character uses I'm Your Huckleberry and singles out the boss character, then the boss has to concentrate on that individual character. And I cannot, as the GM, if I'm running, have the boss go and do anything else until I have put 4 ticks worth of consequences into that clock, or theoretically killed or incapacitated the character who's the Huckleberry, right? But either way, I'm gonna have to put consequences into a very specific place. And characters in Forge games tend to be really tough. So in practicality, I need 4 ticks worth of consequences before that character can then do whatever it is that I want them to be doing. So it's that's a very powerful tank ability. And that's actually that's a hitter. Is that a hitter ability? I don't remember. So there's other modern action abilities that are really fun. Let's see if I have modern action in here. No. All right. So I'm just going to Google. Searching within my own document. This document is, how many pages are you? How many? This 123 pages is this book, and I still have a number of region kind of chapters to write. So I would expect that the first, even if I do it'd be big. It would be a big ash can. If I publish an early version on like itch.io in the way that some designers do, I would expect that document to be somewhere in the territory of 150 to 200 pages, maybe a little bit more, because I've folded in kind of all of the SRD material from the Blades in the Dark SRD, which John Harper kind of has a specific, like, here is the license for just using this material, which is very generous. So I've taken that stuff that I'm allowed to use and I put it into the document, and some of it I'm kind of rephrasing into Genrenauts terms, but it's there as the skeleton, so that I'd like to get to the point where I can hand this to someone and they don't have to know Forged in the Dark games to be able to run this. That would be optimal. It may be a while before I get there. So in modern action, so there's catchphrase, there's the last action hero, where you basically just get a bonus to your action ratings. Sidekick, when you assist another character, you may spend 2 stress to give them +1d and +1 effect. So, you know, in an action story, not everybody is like the action hero all the time. Some movies, it's more equal, some others, not so much. But in something like the movie of Sahara, the Steve Zahn character is actively the sidekick. He's more about supporting this other character. Plus, then he has 1 or 2 domains where he like, oh, okay, this character like is the driver or something like that. And then we have you are the Brute Squad. You have potency on it and all rolls to cause property damage or change the terrain through physical might. So that kind of genre-specific abilities, and that's really fun. So the feedback there was positive. Let me something back to here. Where's my thing? No, it's because it's over on the left. Something that one of the players talked about was that they found that they spent a lot of time in the game in author stance, and this refers to like there's a player like TTRPG play theory framework where you have kind of different stances. So you might have author stance, director stance, and actor stance. And actor stance is like you're more immersed in character, you're speaking in first person. And then author stance is like everybody's telling the story together, and director stance is maybe like you're kind of describing shots cinematically. And there's different framings from different people, but the ultimately this player's point was that they were not spending as much time in character as maybe they would want. I think that is going to be a bit endemic to this game, and is a little bit endemic to Forged in the Dark games, because they encourage that basically everybody telling the story together type of play, where you're like talking about clocks and figuring out like, oh, okay, where are we going to cut to the next scene? So the question I have to ask myself and find out maybe through play is, does the kind of meta-ness of Genrenauts on top of a Forged in the Dark design push the game so much toward that author stance that I want to do something else to make it easier either to jump back and forth or to pull the game a little bit more toward the actor stance. Maybe it's just a game where people are out of character more often, and that's fine. It's not going to be for everyone. No game is for everyone. Not even you, D&D. You're very popular, but you're not for everyone. I'm watching you. Lots of people play D&D and it's fine, but it's not for everything, and it's not for everyone. I'm thinking about what it would be like to try to make Genrenauts in 5e, and it just makes me sad. It gives me a headache. I don't want to do it. Maybe somebody else does, but I'm probably not going to pay you to do it because I'm not interested in that, really. So there you go. Yeah, something that one of the players brought up that I think was a really important point is different Forged in the Dark games seem to intentionally decide how much they want to be like or diverge from Blades in the Dark. So there are some games like Scum and Villainy or Hack the Planet where you are still probably mostly you're likely to be criminals in a crew that starts out kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel and then is kind of working your way up. So those three games, or those two Forged in the Dark games, are very close to Blades in the Dark in terms of who are you and what are you doing. It's just that Scum and Villainy takes Blades and goes to space opera, and there's a little bit of an extra change in that the ship replaces the crew sheet, a la Moya or the Enterprise or Serenity. And then Hack the Planet is you are criminals, but you are in a climate disaster cyberpunk future. So it's science fiction. Something like Band of Blades diverges further, where you are a military unit. You start out in a unit of 100 people, which is much, much larger than the starting Blades in the Dark gang, which tends to be either 5 or fewer people or a dozen or fewer people. Like if you start with a cohort, you might have about a dozen people. Half of those are NPCs and maybe half of them are PCs. And then Band of Blades has a very specific structure, like this is the campaign, where basically we start here, we're trying to get here. There's a bunch of different things that are different, but it still uses engagement roles. It still uses a lot of these other things. And as the Forged in the Dark design tradition grows more mature and as time passes, different designers are diverging more or less in different ways from Blades in the Dark. Something like Girl by Moonlight by Andrew Gillis, which we're playing for Speculate's game Fractal Spire, diverges from Blades in the Dark in a lot of different ways. You are playing magical girls instead of scoundrels. The action ratings are entirely different. So the descriptions of the actions in Girl by Moonlight are very different. If we looked at the actions of Blades and Scum and Villainy and Hack the Planet and kind of compare them, okay, like there's some differences. If we looked at Blades and Girl by Moonlight, you have to read more deeply to understand almost any of the parallels beyond like one or two. So the actions in Girl by Moonlight are things like analyze and perceive are probably the easiest to port over. But then Girl by Moonlight also has actions like forgive, conceal, empathize, because Andrew, the designer, very aptly, I think, chose actions that represent like the biggest, most important verbs that the characters were going to be doing, like that a magical girl type character might do. Now, Girl by Moonlight is also interesting because it has 4 play sets that represent different subgenres. So Girl by Moonlight can be several different games. It's really 4 games in one book that share a system, which is interesting. But that's kind of more something. I don't think I want Genrenauts to be several games in one book in the way that Girl by Moonlight is. But I have been considering, kind of with the feedback from the playtest this weekend, whether I want to differentiate the action ratings more from Blades in the Dark. So the action ratings, let me open my book up. I don't have this like chapter index. I don't have like everything sub-indexed here yet because I don't know Google Docs that well. So I'm going to scroll. Okay, so here are the action ratings in Genrenauts in the current draft, which is version 092. So I started basically with version 01. This is not version 0.1, it's version 0.01, because ideally version 0.1 will be the first version I can share in a broader fashion. We'll see. Numbering is mostly just for my own purposes at this point, and then anybody who I'm sharing the documents with so they can tell which ones are like earlier or later. So we have channel, command, consort, finesse, hunt, prowl, combat, study, survey, sway, tinker, wreck. Of these, combat is renamed from skirmish, but mostly does the same thing. Prowl is renamed from skulk. No, actually, Prowl is in Blades. Skulk is Scum and Villainy, I think. Here's the trick. Having played a bunch of different Forged in the Dark games is good because it gives me a stronger sense of what that design style does, but it also means they all go and smoosh together in my brain. Channel replaces attune, And channel in Genrenauts is very specific because it, like I have like, here is what, basically, this is Genrenauts magic. Channel is a Genrenauts ability to kind of manifest coincidence or genre convention if they want. So if a Genrenaut is in the rom-com world, they could, they could, without too much like having to argue, channel to say like, oh, well, this would be an appropriate time for X character to just walk around the corner, when earlier in the scene there was no indication that they would be at this place. So they might say, okay, well, I'm going to channel to kind of assert or kind of push the universe to say, oh, well, this character is actually just about to walk around the corner. You might use channel to create other coincidences like that. You might maybe use channel to change the world state. I think that's a little bit more difficult because I want to put some interesting constraints on this. And channel is what you would use to do magic in fantasy world, or to do like super hacking stuff in cyberpunk. So that is like the most specific and differentiated in Genrenauts as is. Command, consort, finesse, hunt, prowl, study, survey, sway, tinker, wreck, those are all just like taken directly either from Blaze in the Dark or from other Forged games. But I have been thinking about what it would be like to move farther afield. And I currently have 11, which is not 12, 11 action ratings that I'm thinking about, which are analyze, channel, operate, perceive, sneak, combat, maneuver, waylay, convince, inspire, provoke. So analyze and perceive are taken from Girl by Moonlight. The idea for using those is that for me, I think study and survey are harder to differentiate from one another than analyze and perceive. Because the differentiation between study and survey, as I run it and as I understand it, is kind of about time and context. If you are going to do research on a demon and you're going to take an afternoon, you're using study. If you turn the corner and you want to notice the assassin before they get to shoot you, you would use survey. If you had the chance to like case the joint before you have to go and like do stuff in the action, you might study and then discover with the success on study that that assassin has been like hanging out there. But survey is more about snap judgment, like reading, identifying threats in the moment, and study is more about longer term concerted and or academic study. Analyze and perceive I use as analyze does basically what study does, and perceive does basically what survey does. Perceive is about reading the kind of surface level of things, like identifying, noticing a physical clue or something. You would use perceive to notice a physical clue, but then you might use analyze to like study it in a lab or kind of think deeper about the thing. So perceive is like wider and shallower, and analyze is narrower and deeper. Channel is still channel. Operate replaces something like tinker. Operate then gets to be, a lot of these are fairly broad, or where they're not broad, they are things that are very important to what Genrenauts do. So operate would be like hack a terminal. Operate would be drive a car, and things like that. Sneak replaces prowl, just to kind of be a different word. Combat is still combat. Maneuver is still maneuver. Waylay replaces wreck, because wreck in Blaze in the Dark makes sense because you're scoundrels. You're going to be sabotaging things. It feels more like it points that way. Waylay could be you wreck something and it waylays someone. It could be you interpose yourself because you see that, if you're in a Regency romance and you see that the CAD count is about to go and corner the young debutante, you might use waylay to kind of intercept the count and basically distract him via conversation. So you'd be waylaying there. Or you would waylay if you wanted to like trip somebody on the dance floor. Waylay is kind of interfere, but with a more fun word, right? The trick about that is that you could use other actions to interfere with people. So I have to then do good writing to differentiate, with Waylay, when you waylay, you might X, you might Y, you might Z, but some other action might be better because there are places of overlap between the different actions. And in the core Blades book, that's how the write-ups work. When you study, you might X, you might Y, you might Z, but survey might be better. Because when a player declares an action that declares they're going to take a move, the player get to pick what action they're using. And they say, I'm using this action, and this is how. And then the GM says, oh, okay, based on that, I think you'd be in a risky position, and you're going to have limited effect. When I'm GMing, I tend to say that, and then say, okay, limited effect, I think you would have standard if you used X instead. Or even before they pick whichever action, I might say, I think X or Y actions are likely to have the most effect here. Because then that's communicating as the GM to the player how I see this fictional situation. And then, of course, we have the dialogue whenever necessary. Convince, inspire, provoke replaces command, consort, sway in order to feel more like what are the things that Genrenauts do when they are trying to manipulate a social situation. They are convincing somebody of something. So if I'm lying about who I am, I'm convincing them that I'm this other person. If I'm trying to get like a member of the supporting cast, like a non-Genrenaut who's in the story, to like step up and become a hero, I might be inspiring them to basically take on this larger role or take a risk. You might inspire a group of people. Instead of rolling command to lead a group, you might inspire a group. Or you might provoke a group. The provoke action gives you kind of that harder edge of command with like intimidation. There maybe should be a fourth social action in there, or maybe channel goes in there, and then there's another thing that goes with analyze, operate, perceive. Not sure, because right now I have 11 actions. Blades has 12 actions, 4 in here, 4 in here, 4 in here, and there's 3 different attributes. I want to keep that structure, I think, because Girl by Moonlight has 9 actions, 3, 3, and 3. But I don't know that I want to simplify down to that point, because also having 4 actions per category means that the maximum die pool for resistance is higher than it is in Girl by Moonlight. And I think the tonal range that I'm gesturing toward, or that I'm currently intending in Genrenauts, would best be represented by a system where you can get up to 4D in resist. Still TBD. I am less certain about things after doing the playtest than I was before, but that's fine, because that's a lot of what I was looking for the playtest to do. Because my earlier playtesters were writers that I play tabletop RPGs with, who are my friends, and my home game, who are also my friends. So the type of feedback that they are most inclined or most likely to give is more likely to be supportive and more likely to just buy in, because all of them either know Genrenauts because they've read it, or they're colleagues, or they're my friends and have heard me talk about it. These people, the folks that I ran for Magpie, I don't believe any of them had heard of Genrenauts before it was advertised in the community, the designer Spotlight day, which is good, because it meant that I had to explain Genrenauts from zero for those folks. Something that I thought about is maybe, and this is a little bit taken from Band of Blades and a little bit from Brinkwood, which is it self-describes as castle punk. It's a little Castlevania, a little Bloodborne, where you play revolutionaries using fey magic to fight vampires. It's very cool. I want to play it. Or I guess I ran it one time. I ran a one-shot for some friends, which was fun, but it was very truncated in terms of one-shot. I think we went for less than 3 hours. So in Brinkwood, you don like fey masks that are like, there's the mask of lies and the mask of ruin Ruin and the Mask of Torment, and they have broader, more powerful action ratings that go with the masks that you can only use when you wear that mask. And there's some interesting mechanics that go with it. Band of Blades, the specialist playbooks, the kind of the main playbooks, not rookies, not soldiers. Each of those playbooks has a special action that only they get. Those action ratings then are spent for special effects. So they're almost more like a special ability with a resource pool. So kind of taking those two ideas a little bit, combining them a little bit, creating the kind of empty third in an imagined triptych with them, would be that each region has a specialty action. So as I was thinking, like, okay, in rom-com, the action would be matchmake. So anytime you are trying to basically pull, or like anytime you're trying to get two or more people together in a relationship, you could use matchmake. So it would be a broader action and or a more powerful one. And I don't know if I would want to use the rules from Brinkwood, where there's a thing where you get extra effect if you do one instead of the other. Or does each region have, is it more like Band of Blades where, okay, matchmake, you get X much in matchmake because of Y in the various things, and then you can spend a use of matchmaking to X. I don't know. If I want it to be the fourth action, it should probably be more like an action and less like a special ability. Because the idea there would be that whatever the attribute category that this region-specific action is in is more about like changing the world state of whatever is happening in your genre. So it should probably go with whatever category channel is in, I guess, maybe. Because another, like the action in modern, like the action rating in the modern action genre might just be clash. And so that's broader than combat. And, so there you can use it more broadly. And maybe in cyberpunk, the action is hack. In the like crime region, maybe the action is purloin, or like, some synonym for like burgle, right? And my draft idea is that your character's rating in a genre action is equal to your team's clearance rating, which is the kind of the equivalent of tier, but you get +1 if you are a specialist. So starting characters are clear, their team is clearance level 0, but if you are a specialist and you're going into action world, then you would have a clash action rating of 1. If you're a specialist. If you are not a specialist, you would have a 0. But any action you have, you can roll. And you can always spend, you can always push, you can always get an assist. So a character with 0 in Clash could get up to maybe 3 or so dice, depending on what resources they have available and what kind of help they get. That would put me to 12 because you'd have the 11, and then whatever the 12th is depends on which region you're in. And that would foreground more of the differences. And it would communicate like, oh, you are in some ways less powerful when you're on Earth Prime because the narrative physics of Earth Prime are kind of quote unquote more neutral compared to the story regions. So that's what I'm thinking about different actions. Just looking at what this notification is. This is probably okay. It's a stream notification. That's fine. I'll watch that later. So yeah, that like reconsidering actions is a big part of what I'm chewing on right now, because if I decide to change it, that will have a lot of downstream effects because I'll need to rename a lot of things and redo wording in a lot of the document. And if I go with the region-specific action, I will have to figure out what that action is for each of the regions that are currently in the playtest document. Because right now I have 8 story regions. Depending on what happens with this book, what happens with this game will inform how many story regions I like try to have written up. Because I think I could get to 15 without a lot of difficulty, and that creates a lot of material to have to write, which maybe I don't want to necessarily do. Another thing that I'm thinking about as we get close to an hour, and I think I want to stop there so that I have more time to do other stuff, because Meg should be home soon, and I have some things to do before I go and go do something this evening, which is fun. So the other thing I have in my notes that I'm thinking about patching back in, let's see, have I already put this into the, I've already put this back into the book. Oh, no, actually I didn't call it that. In Brinkwood, there is a disengagement role because you're bandits / revolutionaries. So how cleanly do you get away is something that's interesting. So I had a denouement role in an earlier draft that I cut because I thought it was, maybe this is like more rules in a place where I don't want more rules. But in the novellas, there's kind of the climax, and then there's almost always some scene that is the characters doing or reflecting on having done, kind of tying up loose ends. It's something that's interesting and distinct because Genrenauts are trying to protect a dimensional status quo. The idea, like, they don't have to necessarily beat, they don't necessarily have to run away after they've completed their heists, because they're either in the shadows or they've assumed kind of cover identities. So whereas thieves, if they kidnap someone, they want to like get out of there as quickly as they can. Genrenauts don't necessarily have to immediately leave in that same way. So the denouement role gives the group an opportunity to kind of wrap things up and get that denouement, satisfactory resolution to the story inside the narrative world. And right now I have it as a group action fortune roll, where the results of that will mean that, you didn't actually tie things up very well, and so you're going to take more ripple, this dimensional instability, which is kind of an equivalent to heat. Or you reduce some ripple, or you reduce more ripple, and maybe get extra readiness, which is the ability to set yourself up for success at the beginning of future missions. We're like, we have better intelligence now, or we have more recent information, our supplies are stocked, and that gives us these different bonuses for the various missions. I'm inclined to try to change a small number of things at the same time and see how each change plays out. There is some potential to, if I'm going to change things, I should try to change everything at once, rather than asking my kind of ongoing playtest group to adjust several weeks or several times over the course of a couple of months. I'm going to keep on chewing on this, and then I'm probably going to be talking with my active playtest group. If Magpie is doing community playtest days again next month, I will probably run Genrenauts again with whatever version I'm using at that point. Maybe that's my opportunity to try the other actions. Maybe it's where I try out disengagement roles. Maybe I think about all of this and decide not to use it, but then take the fact that I'm not using it to work on being intentional and precise in doing what I'm doing, rather than doing what I'm doing because I am I'm kind of replicating what Blades was already doing. Okay, do I actually need to copy that part of Blades? Is it helping me make the game be the way that I want this game to be? Or am I copying it over because it fits inside the kind of core Blades mechanism, where I think of Blades as having a lot of different flywheels and gears, where the fingers of the gears interconnect, and so you spin this thing and it starts moving that thing, and then it becomes this almost perpetual drama machine, which is a very cool thing. So that, let me look at my playtest notes. So there's a bunch more here. I don't think it's necessarily a great idea for me to go through the individual comments one by one, because I have not done all the work that I want to in kind of processing that feedback into this is useful, this is, was given with good intention, but I'm not actually going to flag that as a problem. Like that's working as intended, or no, I don't think that's a problem because it's more representative of like an individual player aesthetic that is not necessarily like, oh, this isn't a bug, this is a feature. It's just a feature that you don't like, because not everybody likes everything, and that's fine. So if this is the future to me, and you are seeing this publicly, you can support my work on Genrenauts by going to Patreon at patreon.com/MichaelRUnderwood. And my website is michaelrunderwood.com, which if it's the part of the future where you can buy Genrenauts as a role-playing game, you'll be able to find out how to do so there. Thank you very much to anybody who's watching. Thank you to my patrons for your support, which means that I get money for being me as a creative, which I'm very grateful for and is pretty cool. So thank you all, and I'll talk to you another time. Bye.